Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Banking Matters. I'm your host, Daniel Baker. Joining us today, we have Robert Funk. Robert was born and raised in Falfurrias, Texas, to a banking family. He began working summers during high school and in college as a bookkeeper and teller in the late 1980s. Following his graduation at the University of Texas, he worked at Texas State Bank in Austin in their mortgage loan and accounts receivable factoring departments. After moving back to Falfurrias, he continued to contribute to the family operation, the first national bank in Falfurrias, where he began as an assistant vice president to eventually become president and CEO in 2018. In 2022, Robert and his family made the decision to accept an opportunity to join Karnes County National Bank in Karnes City, Texas, as a senior vice president and chief operating officer, with a focus on scaling into growth markets. As he works at helping Karnes County National Bank to grow, he continues to serve on the board of directors at FNB Falfurrias. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Listen, I really appreciate you guys having me. Once I had the opportunity, I capitalized on it. So thank you for having me.
Well, we're glad to have you. We're excited to have you and your experience on the show and kind of some of the stories that you've got for us today. Robert, I like to always start when we introduce our podcast by giving my guests a chance to introduce themselves and how they got started in the banking industry. So I know we touched a little bit about on that, but what was really your first experience in banking?
Again, probably as young as I can remember. I was born into a banking family in Falfurrias, Texas. Bank that had been there since 1920. Actually, we were a state bank in 1910 and then converted over to National Bank in 1920, well, before my time.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I had exposure as a little kid. My father was in the bank, grandfather before that. And so I'd spent a lot of time inside a bank lobby. My high school years, in the summertime, I'd jump behind that teller terminal and transact and get the experience of being both that and a bookkeeper. And that, translated through the college years and up until when I decided that's what I wanted to do for a career. So it started real early, getting the base knowledge of front facing,
Mm-hmm.
customer service type orientation, really centered around a small town, true community bank. And that's carried through my career for the last 28 years and I'll call it 30. And that sticks true to me to this day, is that, the customer facing community banker is a very important position.
So I have to ask then, because I mean, it was a family bank, right? So where did this start? Like who started the bank?
The bank was started in about 1910. The Ed Rochelle family was a pioneer family who came to Texas from Louisiana back at the turn of the century in the 1900s.
Okay.
They settled just north of Corpus Christi at White Point, and then eventually expanded. Purchased some land in Falfurrias in and around Brooks County. They saw the need for a bank at that point in time, and that's where it all started. To this day, First National Bank Falfurrias is still a one branch bank that serves its community, and that's a tried and true community bank right there.
That is a tried and true community bank. Made it through 2008, 2009. I mean, that tried and true.
Yeah, and conservative, and that's what gets you through Great Depressions and ups and downs, and as long as you hold true to your conservative nature, that's going to get you through those weeds that tend to show themselves.
That's actually a great point, because right now your role is as a chief operating officer at Karnes County National Bank, right? So I'm sure you still have an influence on policies and procedures and conservative. Talk to me a little bit about that role. What would you do in that role?
We do. So when I took this position as chief operations officer, our goal at this bank is, I moved from an $80 million bank to almost a $500 million bank. Only a two-branch bank, $500 million. But the goal is to expand that into the next level and to potentially the regional levels. And so my experience previously at a single branch bank has now expanded to these strategies of really standardizing processes as
Hmm.
you look to grow, because whether you have one or two branches, you need streamlined operations as to prepare for 15, 20, 30 branches. And so really that's been my goal the one little over a year that I've been here, is to really work on standardizing processes. Obviously we're acquiring land in different markets, and branching is a big part of my workload today. But also, really the day to day continues to go on, and the challenges, with things like bank fraud, wire fraud, and the good sides, treating your customers and paying good
Yeah.
returns on deposits. These all fall into the strategies of an ops group, and it's a constant moving target. So yeah, a lot of challenges, but very exciting.
So we'll jump to the fraud a little bit in just a second, because that's something I actually want to pick your brain about. But you're looking at expanding your physical branch footprint. Um, how are we accomplishing this? I mean, it's a big jump to go from two branches to even three, four, or five branches. Like that's not no small endeavor. Like what does this look like?
It is. I've learned a lot of the bigger banks, when they do that, they'll hire a third party consultant to
Hmm.
really give some market studies. We haven't gone that route yet, because I think we're moving into one market in the Beeville, which is about 30 miles from Karnes City, which is a market we know. We've already got a customer base there.
Hmm.
So that's our first goal. And you go through a process. You have to file applications with your regulators. You've got to make legal notices
Hmm.
available in the public paper, and there's the comment period, and then you've got a plan. You've got to obviously build a budget for it, and try not to overspend, and try to stay on schedule. A lot easier said than done, because
A
there's
lot easier said
so
than
many
done.
moving parts. But it is true. That's really a key point of why I'm in Carnes, have moved up in this area,
Right.
because that's really a challenge that I've wanted to work with, and it's exciting every day.
Yeah, I bet, because I mean that's a whole slew of new things. So how do you keep your policies up to date? How are you streamlining those to prepare for this expansion?
It is, we're constantly monitoring our compliance with our policies and procedures. Obviously that's another moving target, is
Yeah.
those change regularly, and you got to have the infrastructure and the personnel to be able to keep you up to task on that. So for the most part, we rely on experienced compliance personnel, and you know follow our regulatory news,
Right.
and make sure that,
Right.
that we're staying up to speed on it. It's very important.
Perfect. So let's transition a little bit to the fraud side. I know you'd mentioned that. As a COO, do you deal with a lot of fraud?
We see it, unfortunately, and one thing that my experience in small towns, and not having too much experience in the urban area, I have felt over the years that fraudsters tend to target the small community banks,
Hmm.
because what they're going after are the more free flowing policies.
Hmm.
And I say that in the means that when you're in a small town, you tend to know a lot of people. I mean, most of your customers better than a bigger bank would. And in doing that, for example, Regulation CC, where you protect yourself from fraudsters by placing holds on checks,
Hmm.
that may not translate well to the small bank market, because you're going to know the customer, you're going to know their transactions, and so you're going to make
A few
exceptions
more
to those
exceptions.
hold.
Yeah.
And the bad guys, they're going to key in on that, and that's why they like coming after small banks, because they've learned that there are looser rules on that, not for bad nor good, but there are, they have an easier chance of getting through,
Hmm.
along with the customer base. A rural customer base, it tends to not be as seasoned as maybe a city or urban group, and over the years, I've run into schemes where romance schemes, and these Nigerian scams,
Hmm.
too good to be true type situations, and for some, unfortunately, I've seen the smaller communities really fall victim to that, um, and so
So
yeah.
without naming any names or anything like that, like can you think of just the kind of fraud or something like that you see more of or more commonly in a smaller community than you would in per se an urban area?
I'm seeing we in Falfurious. I ran through tons of romance schemes, and it's heartbreaking when you bring the customer in, and we know what's going on, and we try to explain to the customer, and sometimes they're so bought
Hmm.
into the what they're going to get out of it that they will continue to the point. There's been several times where I've had to close out accounts to protect those persons, and it's really unfortunate. What I'm seeing more prevalent these days is obviously when you have the advent of Check 21 and all this electronic cash clearing. The
Hmm.
windows of opportunity to catch fraud have closed, and so
Yeah.
we're banks are seeing more and more fraud because there is less time to catch it. Reg
Right.
CC, 2-day hold max unless it's questionable. A lot of times it goes beyond that before we know it's a fraud happening.
Right.
So yeah.
So then, how do you address that? I mean, you look at the age of the digital era where everything's almost immediate. Like, how do you address that? What do you
And the
do?
best you can do is again, it's know your customer. And you got to do your best to know your customer, and it gets tougher and tougher the more customers you have. And so, really, from a policy perspective, as an operations person, is you got to lean more on the hold. The whole putting the holds on and protecting the customers through those
Hmm.
holds. Sometimes in that small community, it may work against the masses, in having to apply holds across the board. So it's a tough balancing act on that. The wires coming in. Well, okay. The other element is knowing your customer and what is a typical deposit for them. Because these schemes are going to be usually larger items, and
Hmm.
there's a good chance that activity is going to be different. I mean, a larger activity on that account is going to be different than the
Atypical.
traditional activity.
Yeah.
So we train our tellers and personnel to really be on the lookout for items that this don't seem right. So really, I mean, it's you know tried and true. We got to be 100% of the time, and the bad guy has to
Right.
be right once, and that's how it
Right.
works.
So then let's talk about your training of your tellers, because you say you train your tellers to identify this. How many tellers, if you don't mind me asking, do you have at Karnes?
Right now we have, I guess, about 9 tellers, and we train annually on the different regulations. Reg CC is a big one,
Hmm.
and knowing your customer, the CIP part of it, which is more new accounts, but
Right.
we get cross train. That one other benefit of being a small bank is you can cross train your personnel. So our tellers, they do get cross trained in the new accounts side of it,
Okay.
and
So
and
they're
that
all they're
customer
all
identity.
understand how account opening process works and
You
everything.
you bet. And that customer identification is universal, and that's going to be our best chance at making sure that we identify as many fraudulent efforts as we can. So
Well, perfect. So how do you find yourself adapting to the changes that have been going on? I mean, like release of Fed now, all these other elements that are hastening the way transactions are processed, ACH transactions and everything. How does Carnes adapt to that? What's your adaptation process? What does that look like?
and really at this point, yeah, I mean, core softwares have advanced, and
Hmm.
so we do have systems available to us to try to identify these and target, and I guess as quickly as things run through the system from deposit to clearing or to rejecting, we just have to act quicker, almost quicker than the human can. So I guess from an operational standpoint, we need to make sure that we have the best systems available to us to whether it's an algorithm or whatnot to identify and at least kick out some of these anomalies that may warrant looking further out. So I think technology
Right.
has a big part in protecting banks from significant losses.
Right, absolutely. So then I'm curious, just for myself, if what's your fraud story? I mean, everybody in the banking industry, if you've been in banking long enough, everybody's got at least that one fraud story.
Yeah,
What's
and
yours?
and and unfortunately, we have a pretty recent one where And the easiest fraud, I'm going to talk about a wire fraud, but the easiest fraud is getting through to either a bank or the bank customer and
Hmm.
find that weak spot. And that's, everyone has, not everyone, but everything seems to trend to the non-vocal. It's all emails
Right.
or
Yeah.
text. And in this specific case, that a transaction went from vocal draws on cash, cash changing
Hmm.
hands. We had an imposter who still haven't figured out whether it was a key logger or if they got access to the systems, but they emailed a key person at that customer of ours and had them wire a substantial sum.
Oof.
Um, and it really, what they did is they just found the gap in the weakness in the security system, and that transaction happened, and immediately once it goes to a wire goes to another bank, it's not
Yeah.
staying there long. The bad guys know to move it around quickly,
They move it around pretty quick.
and really that story rings true to, I could probably think of 10, 15 other
Right.
previous cases of the same, where they found, you know they found that string where they could break, you break the gap. and
Hmm.
and what that is, in a wire, you should have a separate callback procedure, and that break to the chain link was the wire transfer request, as opposed to the phone call that traditionally was. It happens way too often. So
So really, I mean, someone told me once that the weakest part of any system is the people, because I mean, people, we're human. We don't always follow procedure the way we should. We don't always follow the rules the way that we should. So how do you adapt for that? Would you say it just comes down to training? It just comes down to informing your customers and members?
it is, and that goes back to my whole goal of the standardization of processes. Is if you do, maybe, you know awkward at front when you implement a new procedure or policy, but once you get it and it's a standard process across the board, then it becomes just part of the function.
Yeah.
Now, and of course we can do that on the bank side. The challenge is trying to make sure the customer is understanding the risks associated with that, and that's where we also have a responsibility to educate our customers as to how to protect their, what is the best practice to protect their transactions, before they happen. Again, we're getting better at it, and I think we catch more more than
More
get
every
through,
day.
but
Yeah.
those that get through sting, and they're not fun. So there's always improvement, to be had.
Yeah, makes absolute sense. So then the last question I've got for you, and this is one I like to ask all my guests before we run out of time. If you could give one piece of advice, so if you could turn to mid-size, small, large, whatever size bank you so decide, if you could give one piece of advice to banks today, what would it be? What would you say?
I think the key part is as banks become more electronic, they less human interactive. Banks hats are hung on that community, relationship, and being
Hmm.
that, being one with your customer. And it's a real challenge these days when most banking is done over telephone apps and emails. And that's the big challenge. And I think a goal that most bankers would agree is that try not to lose that personal relationship with your customer as we get more and more electronic. It's a challenge, but it's a welcome one. So
Yeah, I completely agree. That relationship is one that is tried and true, right? I mean, if you have concerned about fraud, if you're concerned about anything like that, develop the relationship with your customers. That'll definitely mitigate a lot of that.
that's
Well,
true.
Robert, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today, and we really appreciate you joining our podcast here.
Well, we thank you so much, and I appreciate you having me on. It was a real pleasure.
For the rest of our guests listening in, thank you for tuning in, and that's Banking Matters.